Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to shine a little bit of light on a story I'm sure you've been seeing a lot recently in the media in regards to the potential terrorist attack that was going to happen towards the end of July before being intercepted and stopped by Canadian officials. Now, the reason I want to cover this is because today there was a committee hearing that had a unanimous vote from all political parties to bring forth more witnesses for more questioning. Now, some of these witnesses are going to be Minister Dominic LeBlanc, Minister Mark Miller, as well as some other public servants from different agencies. And as I mentioned, it was a unanimous vote for yes, which was interesting. But the media also did a bit of coverage on it, and so take a look.
Yes pour 11-11, nays contre 0 aucun.
Yes, so the motion as amended passes.
Rare unanimous consent in Ottawa as Liberal, Conservative, NDP and Bloc MPs agree to hold 6 committee hearings to investigate how 2 men charged with plotting a terror attack in Toronto were allowed to enter Canada and acquire citizenship.
This is a colossal failure and we need answers. That's why we want to have Minister LeBlanc, Minister Miller, with respect to public safety and immigration, come forward, because thus far the government has given no answers.
Though Conservatives called this special meeting of the Public Safety Committee, Liberals jumped the queue and were the ones to move to call their own ministers to answer questions. Tories amended the Liberal motion to call the CSIS director, CBSA president, former Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodell, and a host of civil servants as witnesses as well. Tories have tried to recall multiple committees over the summer. Efforts usually met with Liberals trying to block meetings when they happen.
We're not afraid to have meetings. We're not afraid to have tough conversations. The Minister LeBlanc has rightly pointed out that Canadians are concerned and have a right to know.
O'Connell's motion and a Conservative amendment to the motion both passed with no votes against, but O'Connell suggested Tories might not like what the committee hears.
Previously, under the Harper government, when they cut more than 1,000 CBSA employees, at the time, the president of the Customs and Immigration Union said, quote, "There will be little and in some cases potentially no investigating or surveillance being done to keep these criminals out of the country."
Afterwards, Conservative public safety critic Frank Caputo dismissed Liberal attempts to shift blame.
Last time I checked, this has been a Liberal government over the last 9 years. This is a bureaucracy and a public service that has swollen dramatically, and yet we're still seeing a government that's not getting the job done when it comes to keeping Canadians safe.
The committee agreed to call Ministers Mark Miller and Dominic LeBlanc to answer questions the week of August 26th, the same week as the Liberal cabinet retreat. In Ottawa, Shaoli Lee, City News.
Now, one thing I will say is I'm really not surprised that MP O'Connell there had to bring up Stephen Harper yet again. This lady really loves doing that, but she's not wrong. You can see articles from City News back in 2012, as well as the Globe and Mail in 2012 talking about this. Border staff cuts called direct attack on national security. It goes on to say Prime Minister Stephen Harper and the U.S. President Barack Obama unveiled sweeping plans late last year to focus security efforts more on intelligence and pre-clearance away from the border rather than directly at the crossings. Now, in the City News article, it does give that quote that she was talking about. There will be little and some cases potentially no investigating or surveillance being done to keep these criminals out of the country and out of our communities. If the government doesn't change the course and withdraw its plan to implement these cuts, the federal government will be putting the national security and public safety of our community at risk. Now, again, this was back in 2012. This gentleman for the terrorist attack came in 2015, and that's when the Liberals took over. How big of an issue that really was, I can't tell you. However, another interesting part that MP O'Connell mentioned there was that they're not afraid to have these meetings, especially for the summertime, when that was something that the NDP and the Liberals voted on to not have. When MP Green was going around to different committees proposing this, as well as we just saw that in the women's committee where Anita brought it up that we don't do this over the summer.
the importance not only federally but at the other levels of government. And with that being said, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move a motion with the remainder of my time, and then I will speak to the motion as procedurally correct. That as for the usual practice of the House of Commons standing committees, the Standing Committee on Government Operation and Estimates shall not meet during Parliament's summer recess unless the requirements of the 106.4 the standing orders are met.
Do, with respect, want to talk a little bit about how this meeting came about. We have had studies that we've all agreed on to talk about these issues. In fact, we're in the middle of a study right now on coercive control, which we have put a number of witnesses that we'd like to hear from as a committee. But we know that the Leader of the Opposition has asked Conservative-chaired committees to hold as many meetings as possible during the summer to take us away from the important work that we're doing listening to our constituents. Yes, it's an emergency. I would have loved to have had an emergency meeting in June so we could have gotten our red dress alert study done before the end of the session.
Now, Anita there mentions listening to the constituents, but as I mentioned in the last video, it doesn't really seem like that the Liberals are doing that, seeing as they continuously double down on everything. However, as you heard from Anita there, she wished that they had had this emergency meeting back in June. The reason they had the emergency meeting in July was because that's when StatsCan came out with the new stats of the increased violence towards women. So her talking about, oh, I wish we had it in June before the session, that's all they care about is their summer vacation. Then if we look back at what MP Green put forward in his motion, he mentions the Standing Order 106.4. Now, if we go to the committee's Standing Order 106 and then we scroll down to 4, it states, although standing committees usually meet pursuant to the previously adopted schedule or at the call of the chair, Standing Order provides for a meeting to be called at the request of any 4 members of the committee. Now, I believe the Conservatives couldn't do that because I believe there's only 3 of them, so they would need help from another party to put forward this motion to bring back the committee. However, the NDP Liberals keep voting against them, and even the Bloc tend to keep voting with the NDP Liberals, so that's why none of these meetings keep getting put forward and they're shut down because the Conservatives don't have anybody else to join them, which I'm sure is why MP Green put that stipulation forward with his motion. Now, if we go back to that City News article, it mentions here that the Parliamentary Secretary of Safety, Candice Bergen, that's who that is, stated that many people will simply be moved around in the department, and most of the positions being slashed are duplicates, which aren't delivering what needed and must go. And this is interesting because today, you also had with CBC, a criminologist come out and state that that's exactly what we have. We have 4 federal agencies or departments that are basically doing the same jobs overlapping, and this is going to be a problem. And he himself was a former CBSA agent. So for him to say this is quite interesting. So take a look at this.
Now, for more on how these 2 individuals passed security screenings, we're joined by Kelly Sunberg. He is a professor of criminology at Mount Royal University and a former CBSA officer. Perfect person for a story like this, really. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
So a lot of Canadians are going to be startled when they hear a story like this. Walk me through how this could have happened and how this case could have slipped through the cracks like this.
Well, there's a few cracks that it fell through. One in the immigration, in the refugee process, and then so there's screening the initial screening when you're coming to Canada. Then there's the screening when you get permanent resident status. It's supposed to happen, and then there's screening for citizenship.
Right, because the father was a Canadian citizen.
He became a Canadian citizen, after being alleged to have dismembered people on a video. A known member of ISIS participating in ISIS propaganda. The challenge is that, one, our government does not resource the people we need overseas to collect the information and intelligence on people to do proper screening. Many people who come to our country, and I mean, the vast majority, of course, are hardworking people who just want to make a better life. But there is a cohort of people around the world that do want to come here to hide, and to do us harm. When we can't trust the police and the security services of a lot of countries around the world. But we don't have the people to give us the information.
How concerning is that? I mean, you say that we don't have the people to do it. So how concerning is that, and how vulnerable does that make Canada?
We're very vulnerable. It's very concerning, and it's been this way for over a decade. We just don't have the capacity. We have brilliant people working for CBSA and other agencies, but we have 4 agencies that are ultimately responsible for our immigration security. That's CSIS, the RCMP, Immigration Department, as well as CBSA itself. When you have 4 different federal agencies that are engaged in one function, it's problematic in itself. There's no oversight of CBSA. That's a problem. Now we see today Parliament saying that they're going to start looking at this, and I hope they realize that perhaps having no oversight might be an issue to this. But we just don't know the background of these people without having our own officers overseas. I think that's one of the first steps. And we have to have the capacity here to have people who are scouring the dark web, who are looking actively for these types of videos for the purpose of immigration screening. But it takes a long time.
Well, and one of the concerning things, added concerns here, if you will, is that CSIS was actually warned about the LDDs by an allied country. So what does that tell us about our counterterrorism efforts here?
Well, it's often the case where we hear from the British or the Americans through one of their investigations, they find out something's going to happen. Thank God we have the relationship with the Five Eye partners and others that do provide us this information. But what it shows is we're not doing enough. We're not contributing to that Five Eyes infrastructure because we politicized so much of our immigration program. And we have competing interests within the administration and the selection process for immigrants. There's this disjointedness. Right. If we're bringing in hundreds of thousands of immigrants, and we need to, we have to ensure that that immigration program also has a very robust policing section to it. So we need to expand our capacity. And like I said, having several government agencies, not 2, not 3, 4, involved in this process, we can see where inefficiencies and things are going to fall through the cracks.
Well, and you highlighted there, Kelly, for me, several problems with the system. If you could make just one change, one of those changes you mentioned, which one do you think would have the biggest impact?
I would realign the CBSA so that it took the very predominant role in immigration and border security, and I would change its focus from the Canada Border Services Agency to the Canada Border Security Agency. And we're exposed. You know, this is an example where a lot of people could have lost their lives here in Toronto, and that's that has to be investigated. Yeah. But sadly, this isn't anything new.
And yeah, it is sad that this is nothing new. But as you heard, a few different points that I want to touch on that he mentions. One is that there was 3 different processes when he immigrated into that should have had a background check. When he got his permanent resident status, should have had a background check or more looked more into. And then when he also became a citizen, that gentleman should have had more looked into him. All of that failed. And he said, yeah, this has been a problem for over a decade. However, this individual should have been on the radar, especially of the RCMP, within the past decade, especially if that is the immigration process. However, even when the RCMP back at the end of July had a press conference where it was one of the worst press conferences I've ever seen, they actually didn't answer any questions because they kept saying that there was a publication ban, so they couldn't give out any information. So every question from the reporters were basically like, oh, I don't want to touch on that because of this, or I don't want to touch on that because of that. However, some of the questions that they did answer were, when did you find out about these guys? Which they mentioned was the beginning of July or beginning to mid of July. And that's concerning that it took them, like they only just found out before this attack happened. Again, luckily they did stop it, but they had only found out from the information that they got just before this thing basically went down. And then the other one was, were these guys Canadian citizens? And the RCMP officer here says that yes, they were. And when questioned about were they both, he says yes, they were both to his knowledge.
Say, was he on your radar at all before the beginning of July?
No, sir.
My second question, are either of these two Canadian citizens?
Yes, sir, they are.
Both? Are they both Canadian citizens?
As far as I understand, yes, they are.
Now, I know this press conference happened days after the arrest, and maybe more information was coming in, but I feel like him saying, to his understanding, they both were Canadian citizens when that's not the case, that should be at least the bare minimum, I feel like, of what you should know, especially for individuals who were planning an attack on Canadian soil. You would want to know if they're radicals from another country, if they were Canadians who became radicalized, stuff like that. And you could say, well, he was half right. The father was a Canadian citizen. It was just the son that wasn't. Irregardless, that basic information should be known, at least in my opinion. And I feel like this might be why a lot of people don't have faith in the criminal justice system or in policing in Canada, as mentioned in our previous video as well. And in all honesty, I hope with bringing in Minister Dominic LeBlanc and Minister Mark Miller to these committees, questioning them, we get some sort of answers. Highly unlikely, seeing as they are liberals and there's so much corruption that's happening in that government already. But again, only time will tell. Hopefully these committee hearings do produce some sort of beneficial information. But as always, this is my opinion. Love to hear from you guys. So let me know in the comment section below. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.